Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you very much for tuning in today. Good to see a lot of you here in the participants tab. Great. So we'll get started. Yeah, I think that's good to go. Great. So hope everyone's safe and well. My name's Simon Fraser. I'm the managing director of Hut6. And during these stressful times, in lockdown, we've been taking the opportunity to refocus what we've been doing at Hut6, as I'm sure has been happening in your organizations as well. And part of that has been launching this webinar series to address how our solution can work best for clients, and also, to share some of our expertise that we've gained throughout its delivery. During the session, you're muted by default, but if you do wish to speak, simply raise a hand and I can answer your question through the Q&A function as well and through the chat. So we can use that tool to sort of open discussion to the floor as we go. And I'd like to take them in my stride as we go through the problem. So today we're going to be talking about communicating human risk to your board, and I hope to answer these 4 questions that you should see on your screen now. Essentially, it's a problem of how do you communicate the human factor to your board, who are more traditionally focused with profitability or maybe more technical costs and associated with doing security. So we look at how we frame the problem in terms of return on investment, laying out specific goals and aims and key performance indicators within the program to then sort of communicate it over to the board as a multifaceted strategy, and then common blockers you'll face, how we can get around them. And then at the end, I'll share with you some resources that we can leverage in that mission. Hopefully this later time as well, I see a couple of people so that people from across the pond can join us as well. Good. Okay. So over our 4-year journey as a company, we've worked with lots of different types of organization. We have been changing behaviors within them and convincing the users to change their behaviors, but also in each of those journeys, we first had to convince the board that it was a good idea to do so. And whilst I'm sure that managing your internal budget is something that you have down to an art form and you know the ins and outs of exactly what you're trying to do and where your costs are, what I want to talk about today is how we're going to, what we've learned as Hut6 about communicating human risk in board language. The problem itself. So simply put, in cyber and information security, the human factor is often the most targeted attack vector, but it has the least tangible solution. Thankfully, solving it is relatively low cost, but it is high in difficulty. And that's what I mean by least tangible. And that difficulty comes in several components. It takes time to implement behavioral change and make sure that your users aren't clicking on phishing links, don't have poor passwords, have good cyber hygiene. It requires a multifaceted campaign to touch those different pain points within the organization, and often has many stakeholders involved, like security, HR, IT, even sales sometimes. And it also needs to be continuous. It's not a sort of a shot you go in for and you get vaccinated against human error. Instead, it's a continuous course of antibiotics for your organization that takes time to implement and has to be a continuous message that you take people on the journey with you. Often the failure in awareness campaigns can be if it's a one shot, or if it's a, say, a tick in the box exercise in training, you won't have people on board with you, going with you through that journey. So it relies, and there again, the crux of the issue, it relies upon changing people's behaviors. There's no silver bullet that's going to solve all your problems. Instead, you're relying on individuals to take the right actions and treat security and secure behaviors as business as normal. And I think the scariest thing is really that time it takes to get any results and to track those results meaningfully. And all of these are going to be problematic when you're trying to sell the campaign to the board as necessary or a worthwhile course of action. And then all of that, not only is it difficult to solve that particular problem, there's a larger problem that's faced by security when talking to your board, which is you weren't originally, security didn't always have a seat on the board. And secondly, that its security is a preventative measure. And boards often function in the world of profitability and financial decisions that are designed to get the company on a certain course. And security is preventative and non-revenue revenue generating, which isn't very applicable in those terms. So what we need to do is reimagine that problem for them and communicate it in their terms. Ultimately, we all implement security awareness programs to protect organizations from human risk, which involves training, it involves testing, measuring behavior, and then turning those vulnerabilities into strong reporters. So, but it has a bad rep. Security awareness in general is sometimes seen as overly condescending. It's sometimes seen as ineffectual or a sort of matter of course that someone will eventually click on a link. We need to reinterpret how the board views awareness raising activities. And step one is in the comms. So you need to avoid the blame game. People are not just an obstacle to be overcome, they're an ally to rely upon and leverage. Often people refer to the human as the weakest link in your security chain. The problem with that is, and that's very outmoded, that's of 2015, if we lean into that metaphor, when you're forging a chain, as I'm sure we all have in our time, but just to extend the metaphor beyond its useful value, we spend time selecting a metal for its tensile strength and its malleable properties. And if one of those links was hastily put together, potentially untempered or made of a softer metal, we wouldn't blame the link itself and give up on it. Instead, we would look at the metal used and the method of forging and the time that was invested into preparing that link. So similarly, you need to recognize that people need to be given time to change their behaviors and the same resources. Awareness programs may have failed in the past, but it's only because they weren't given the same investment or priority in your security framework when pitching to the board. People can become strong enough links to be part of the security chain and go even further to reduce your reporting times, the detection times, which are all crucial in minimizing the sort of fallout of a breach and also remaining compliant. So this sort of plays into what we discussed in last month's webinar, where we talked about maturing awareness campaigns. Going past compliance into awareness and changing behavior will really get the value out of the campaign. And so step one in communicating the board is to change the narrative on awareness, to make sure that it's properly valued and understood, that people are going to be the asset that comes out of it and not the problem that's being fixed. Step two is, after you've undermined those assumptions, is to flip cost-benefit analysis around. I said earlier that security is a preventative measure, and so it doesn't fit very well into the ROI, but what it does fit into is the sort of cost or cost of no action analysis instead of cost and cost benefit. So security's function is to protect a company and data and prevent loss. Only by extension does it sustain profitability. It doesn't have, you can't say input A, okay, and then, no, it's not like hiring a salesperson where you suddenly get more resource and more outbound activity, and then you can easily step up the revenue projections and forecasts that you've made for your business. Instead, you're trying to, like any risk, trying to mitigate it, reduce the likelihood of it's happening, and put that control in place for that reason. Emphasis should be put on the fact that security isn't providing a silver bullet, and ultimately you're building an organization. If you're trying to build an organization with no incidents and no threats and no vulnerabilities, it's an impossible task. It's important to keep in mind that no organization can truly eliminate risk, and security awareness is often held to a higher standard without very good justification. So instead, we want to look at how the risks that we face and how the board would view them, which is often with a profitability factor multiplied into that equation. So you map out your threats, vulnerabilities, and their severities as a modifier to estimate risk. And your likelihood is often your number of threats times by the number of vulnerabilities that you have. And then you calculate that risk for your purpose. The board, however, is doing likelihood times severity times profitability. And the synthesis of these for you has to be flipping that profitability on its head and saying, what's the cost of not doing it? What's the cost of not implementing security awareness? So likelihood, severity times cost of no action. And this can be achieved through relevant examples within your industry or massive recent events in the news. And it should be viable for you to be able to demonstrate a nominal but not actual return on investment for the board. And we'll go into resources and how that argument should be structured later on. But just getting out the way early in that conversation that security is preventative, not and not 100% so. It's a mitigation, not a solution. Step 3 is measuring the cost of running the awareness campaign. So you've set out the ROI, you've undermined the prejudice that people have against security awareness, and you now need to look at how much it's actually going to cost you on the ground to do the awareness campaign alongside the cost of the security, the technical security controls you've already got in place. Before you panic, this isn't an exercise in getting your budget reduced by drawing attention to large spend in other areas. Instead, we're looking at balancing the risks we face with the investment in prevention. And why potentially security awareness campaigns haven't worked in the past is they've just been computer-based training, or they've just been an assessment. There's been no diversification of media or proper investment with full-time employees behind it, potentially. So when we balance that investment with risks we face, we want to get a realistic grasp on what staying safe costs us. So how much are we spending per machine on things like antivirus, on keeping updates current, on two-factor authentication, on VPNs, on backups of data that we already hold, and per computer, what does our system cost us to monitor networks, to all the security technical paraphernalia that organizations invest in? What does that look like? And also include in that cost the support costs and the salaries of your team managing the different projects. Once you've boiled that down to a per seat cost basis, you can now measure up exactly how much we invest in protecting a machine, and likely it will paint a stark contrast between the investment of person versus machine when you take into account the different security awareness activities you're going to be doing, such as training, phishing simulation, quizzes, in-person events, internal marketing videos, posters, roller banners, maybe an investment in different technologies to raise awareness across your organization, and also management of that campaign, salaries and support costs. That will leave you with three things. That will you'll build a case around the need to invest in people. And that should really be the step one of your argument, is to lay out not necessarily the direct risks the business faces, but the previous investment strategy and how we should then move forward after that. So firstly, it's not people's fault that they're considered the weakest link. Secondly, an awareness campaign has a cost of not doing it. And thirdly, ROI is likely to be higher as the cost of investment is comparatively low to the technical measures they've already put in. The next stage is the softer touch one. And this is where I think soft skills really play a part, and preparation will also see you through. So having summarized what's been invested in protecting technology versus people, we need to humanize the argument and bring them home to communicate them to what risks they actually face. And just like any audience, when you're conducting an awareness campaign, you need to look at the board and work out what they think and do currently before your pitch, and then what you want them to be thinking and doing afterwards. And a personal argument like that will place them in the scenario and resonate strongly and tell a story that illustrates human risk across the organization. Just going to check. So I have no questions in thus far. That's fine. So if you do have a question at any point, do just pop it in the Q&A section, and I'll answer it as we flow through. So the obvious example to start with that humanization story is CEO fraud. It speaks directly to their role and their position, the authority they already wield, and the dangers that are placed upon their own personal brand and reputation by people impersonating them. So if you have to hand a real targeted CEO fraud attack or business enterprise compromise, business email compromise attack, it will help you tell a story around that, and it may be comprised of various human error factors like phishing, spear phishing, vishing, whaling attacks, social engineering, poor password use. A myriad of features can feed into a story to paint human risk. It doesn't need to be a list of the attack vectors, but if you tell the story as it unfolds, And the most impactful examples you can use will be from your own organization. If you're lucky enough to have a SOC team, I'm sure they'll have their flagship story that they have learned from and moved on from. If you don't have that, then you're probably quite lucky, as no one's extorted you. But also, then you can fall back to many resources that I will probably circulate after this webinar, as it's easier to go through them like that. Additionally, I'll also be putting together a slide deck, which I'll share to you, that may aid you in any sort of upcoming battles you have with your board, leveraging what we've discussed here. And if that is something you're interested in, then just get in touch with me afterwards, and I'd be happy to share that with you. Additionally, also, if you're already exploring security awareness vendors, your chosen vendor should be able to help you with the preparation of an example or a specific case study that applies to your industry. And the important part here is placing the risk somewhere close to home. And also don't use too much fear, uncertainty, or doubt. There are lots of stats out there that can be very overwhelming, but at the end of the day, they are just a percentage that someone wanted to put in a report. That's not to say all reports are marketing purposes. I mean, there are some really great ones out there. Things that we've leveraged in the past have been Verizon data breach investigation and DCMS's cyber breaches survey. But yeah, your security awareness vendor should be able to help you with that preparation. And we have plenty of experience crafting those sort of proposals. The CEO fraud example also is not just useful because it involves a board member, it's also useful as it relies heavily on impersonation and it avoids a lot of technical hurdles. For those who may not know, obviously maybe just talking with a buzzword here. These are attacks where someone in the C-suite is impersonated, their authority is leveraged to hasten a decision that breaks protocol and ends with the attacker extorting funds. There's very little barrier to entry for attacks to get involved, for attackers to start doing this. They really often only need half an hour on social media, identify who the people in a process might be, maybe a couple of example emails to replicate. And as a result, it's one that it doesn't have malware or and it's not an infected email that will get picked up by a sensor. It does require that human touch to be found and reported, and it relies upon your staff being used to business processes that they stick to without shortcuts or breaking protocol to be helpful. So after that story of how the attack unfolded and what the fallout happened to be, the solution needs to be as clear as it can possibly be. When reporting to a board, it's often useful to just preface any report with stats and figures on the key performance indicators that you're facing. In this case, we need to be absolutely clear about what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, and what success looks like. So boards are financially motivated, but they also they track performance indicators to tell them how business is operating and what taps on the rudder they need to make as and when. They can't have visibility into every granular detail, but it needs to be put front and center what you need their approval or their discussion around. And as such, a full breakdown of what you intend to implement, over what time period, and what you'll achieve is necessary. So actually that'll come up later, I suppose. So one of the things we've been thinking about is running another, obviously it's going to be a series of webinars, and another topic that I want to avoid diving too deeply into is metrics, because there is an entire webinar's worth of discussion, and also they're very personal. But at the end, I'll be sharing a poll to see what sort of topic you'd be interested in next month. And instead, let's use this time here to discuss how the metrics should be framed and presented and who you should get involved. So communicating to the board is something that happens long before you have the pitch event. And sometimes even that stage can be avoided with proper planning and strategy. it's very important that you go into the room with the right ownership behind the program. Security awareness programs are creating change across an entire organization. And as such, it's pertinent to involve other groups in creating and defining your strategy. For example, when you're looking at your human risks, you can crowdsource them from other departments and find common ground with security awareness. So you can pluck out the risks that are sort of pertinent to the campaign. Things like physical security, like IT, like operations, HR, and sales will all have concerns that bite into their budget and risks that can be solved with your awareness campaign. If you go into the room saying, I'm not only going to solve securities issues, I'm going to solve some HR issues with induction training, or I'm going to solve operations or physical securities with a key card campaign, then it'll feed into the necessity of your project. Especially in the current climate, where a lot of companies' workforces have been thrown to the wind, it can be centering and reassuring to have a unified voice across the company that communicates and reflects the changes that have been necessary from each department to working remotely. Additionally, security awareness from home is a very different beast to that within the confines of an office, and it has thousands of unknown vectors like home networks and other household members. And I suppose that's another potential topic for a webinar. And we've talked about it in previous webinars when setting up ownership of the campaign and solving other people's problem can be an extremely potent driver. For example, you're helping you're helping operations with the reduced costs in lost equipment. One of the outcomes might be you become compliant with a certain standard. That'll help sales in terms of vetting you as a vendor, or even just safeguarding personal data in terms of risk and compliance. So whilst you're out gathering allies for your proposal, you should also try and make sure to gain the support of at least one member of the board prior to it being discussed as a proposal. Not only will they champion you throughout the budget acquisition stage, but they will also help be a figurehead and add a face to the campaign as it evolves into its more mature phases. Having that top level buy-in communicates to the employees the value that you are putting into the awareness campaign. And that is the number one thing I think we've learned from doing our training over the years, is people can sense or already have an understanding of how much investment and how much time has been put into this, and they will often match that investment with uptake and engagement because of the specificity and the personal nature of the argument you're making. I suppose after you've got the ownership, the first thing you need to whack in front of them is the budget. Establish a total cost and put that figure as an ask that you clearly communicate at the center of your discussion. Very often we've seen boards surprised with either the low cost unveiled at the very end, which if it was put front and center would have helped discussion at an earlier stage. And secondly, we've also seen boards walk away without a clear idea of how much it will cost after a successful pitch, and as such miss out on different procurement hurdles that have to be covered, or even just approval in general. And this can result in delays, which can undermine the sort of the effectiveness and the speed at which you can get your campaign up and running. After budget, as I said before, human resource is part of the solution. So you need to address where, just as when you're laying out the cost of technical security, you need to consider what salaries and hours spent are going to go into this project. And this is where the strength of an awareness campaign can really help you. If you can show that you're going to have the right sort of skills within the security team, but also leverage other people from other departments briefly and not be too impactful on their time, you will have properly communicated to the entire body what the value of the project is going to be. And having a super clear job spec around that will help the board understand what the role entails. So very often comms and marketing skills are the thing you think of last, and they need to be at the front and center of the awareness campaign. They need to be tied into it, into the delivery is examples of comms you're going to use, different nicely designed posters, and convincing and language to get people to uptake, especially, but having that pre-prepared before the conversation with the board will help you justify the need for those softer skills within the campaign. If there's struggle here about headcount and hiring freezes that are happening during the COVID crisis, there are many resources you could draw upon that would be able to be brought into the business without outright adding them to the payroll. The best example I can think of is, for example, a year in industry student from social sciences background, potentially, to help manage and measure the campaign. And this can be a recurring yearly position for undergrads to get some experience, but it can also bring fresh ideas and manpower into the business at a low cost. Other than that, there's many internships and apprenticeship schemes that you can also use, as well as some more timely ones where people looking for experience, or people on furlough who can't necessarily do work but are happy to volunteer, or fresh graduates looking for internships, are collecting insights like We Are Unbox or Sage Corps or Tandem Project, and I'll share a list of these at the end. But they're schemes which enable people to work with your business whilst they have they're looking to build their skills and build their CV. The next stage, I suppose, so we're looking here at the solution, and obviously part of that is the facets of the program. The more facets you have to your program, or the more different media you're going out over, not only the more people you'll reach, but also the further you'll go with the budget you're allocated. Because each type of media has a KPI and a milestone you can measure and put in terms of that board language. So if you're doing videos, you can measure engagement. If you're doing interactive tutorials, you can measure score, uptake, and interactions. If you're doing phishing simulations, you can measure click rates, open rates, report rates, repeat offenders. For posters, quizzes, blog posts, tip sheets, or cyber champions, you can measure larger metrics like workforce training uptake or reported incidents, or the number of the percentage of strong passwords in your database, or devices updated within a day of the patch being released, or policy violations, or times to detection of incidents. And these will be metrics that will feed into a future webinar, but also underpin the fact that this is going to have a far-reaching effect. The more that you can do of auxiliary activities like posters, quizzes, internal blog posts, they will go far for very low cost and help the entire sort of face of security as you take people on this journey from no awareness to compliance through to changing behavior. If you tie these facets as well to top risks like phishing, social engineering, password security, accidental insider threat, they will support the narrative of you're solving a business-wide problem at a low cost. And lastly, compliance obligations being met. You should know that if you show them the ticks in the boxes that you are achieving, great. You know, we need stamps of compliance. It can be, we want to avoid the stigma of doing compliance for compliance's sake, as that will be a less effective solution, and it really doesn't work in awareness campaigns in terms of changing behavior. But it does have a value to the board, but leaving it till last in your presentation of the solution, where you've gone through ownership, budget, human resource, and facets of the program or components of the program, leaving compliance to last will just show where you rank it in importance, and make sure that the real risks you're facing are at the center of discussion rather than the accreditations you'll be achieving. All of these should be designed around what level of maturity your organization is currently at and what level you hope to achieve at the next stage in your program. As it is always, it's an ongoing endeavor to secure people within the organization. The most efficient way of communicating human risk to your board is always going to be reporting on it. If you're reporting monthly or quarterly the threats, incidents, and impacts alongside the KPIs of the campaign after you've won that initial budget, then you're taking your directors and, in this case, they're sort of like investors on a journey with you. So they can support you when the time comes to make adjustments, and they understand the change across the business that needs to make security business as usual. So once you've done all this presentation of the solution, reporting or the commitment to reporting is a very useful way to establish whether or not it's been a success or failure, and make sure you get those reports out monthly, quarterly, regularly to the same people. They may not read them top to bottom first time, but then the third or fifth time, they'll be familiar, and it'll be a glance, and it'll be an understanding of where you're going wrong or where you're going right. During that time, you've taken them from setting up a problem, putting it in their financial terms that they would want to see a business case presented in, then transitioning through a human story about a breach into the solution and the facets that you're going to, the facets of the project you're going to be working on. What sort of blockers are we going to face? I've talked before about the stigma around awareness programs, people saying they don't work or they're ineffectual. That's often because they haven't been designed to work. So if your board comes back and says, right, awareness programs don't work, the way to convince them otherwise is to ask them how the last awareness program they were part of or witnessed was structured at its initial steps. Was it designed around compliance obligations? Did it have a sort of 3-year, 5-year plan attached to it, or was it a 1-year plan? Did it have enough specificity and customization to the specific instances that people find? Was it personal? And did it have a proper unified and universal message to your staff? Because if it didn't, then it's an unfair, it's undermined by the premise. It hasn't, a mature awareness program will change behavior. And when you're measuring that properly, you can see when it's not working, when it has worked. In no other aspect, it's a very confusing statement to people, because in very few other aspects of business do people rule out an entire activity because of one failure. No, you adapt the way you do it. You don't undermine, you don't dispose of the control itself. And I suppose that's people often feel they failed because if one person clicks, then awareness has failed and it's an awareness breach. No other security control gets held to that standard. A firewall is only as good as its last patch. An email gateway may let a few through, but you don't, or for example, key cards, they're designed to stop unauthorized access, but if one person gets in, they failed. That doesn't undermine the investment in them. Similarly, an awareness program is just there. It's just another control. It's another mitigation step in approaching that Sisyphean task of protecting your business. Awareness is just about prevention. This is, again, geared around the lack of maturity. It can also be about detection. And very often in human error cases, the earlier you can catch on to a pattern or a particular indicator within a phishing email and share that with the rest of your business to say, we are being targeted by this attack, the safer the majority of people will be. The click rate will go right down. If you announce that you're going to be doing a certain type of phishing email is going to come into people's inbox. that is part of the campaign's outcomes should be detection, not just prevention. Another blocker we might face is a zero trust attitude and a if we're compliant, we're all right attitude. I'd say that that's quite outdated in the current climate. It's been proven not to be the case, with high fines, but also reputational damage to mishandling personal data. And again, you can source non-homegrown examples of that just from the news in recent times. I've got a question coming in here. What do you think about using phishing simulations to demonstrate risks, etc.? So that should be a part of your campaign. I think that is one of the more tangible results that you can have from one of the more tangible KPIs you can hold in your KPI in your reports that you're going to be issuing. As a tool for engaging users, again, it's another facet. It puts the risk in the real world. You need to be careful not to do it negatively and not to do it in a way that can cause distress or even, in some cases, more serious mental health issues. For example, there were multiple suicides associated with the the affairs website. I can't quite remember the name of it. When that data was leaked, it can be tied to very high stress and high concern issues. And I know I've had various crying family members who, because of my line of business, have rung me up and said, this person has my password, or this person has my search history. And those you've got to avoid those negative moments, as they will not be a teachable moment unless they are real. If someone discovers that you have been misusing phishing simulation in that negative way, you will have lost their trust, and you will have lost the integrity to keep training them. So we tend to run phishing simulation alongside training, but geared around indicators we've already shown and lower stakes than sometimes more emotional phishing campaigns can be. That was in response to a question of what do you think the value of phishing simulations are in this. I think they can be convincing to boards as well if you get their approval in the first place to run some CEO fraud against them, to see how first of all, the organization might respond to CEO fraud, or how the board might fall for phishing attacks themselves. And that can be an acid test for them. But again, it really relies upon fitting in with your culture. The first and foremost thing you need to remember is you're changing behaviors and changing cultures here. Culture is a very precious thing to people. It can be bad to add to a toxic work environment if you get things wrong. And as a result, if your board is the sort of people who are quite game for that sort of phishing simulation, that can be really convincing. But it's about knowing your audience. Another blocker that we find is competing for internal marketing bandwidth. If this is an issue for you, that's again getting importance over to the board. One of the things we have seen work is piggybacking some of your comms onto other people's messaging. This can help have a built-in security culture rather than a bolt-on, to use a pithy phrase. But it can mean that security is business as usual because it's coming from the HR department talking about the security of your pension account, for example. And making sure that those comms are woven into the other departments where your stakeholders are can reduce the amount of bandwidth you're going to require and lower. And actually similar to the way that setting out the broad focus of your campaign with those different channels and different media, if you're able to spread it out, you can spread it thinner and not use up as much bandwidth if that's the concern. And then the one that we find most is the previous campaign went nowhere. Crucially, you need to identify the reason why. If that's a one-word answer, then you're gonna struggle. But you need to have that conversation and no two campaigns will be alike. This time you'll be equipped with the lessons learned from the last one. And not only that, your users will have seen it and they'll understand. You can even use that to build off. You can say, last year we got feedback that this didn't work. We've responded to that. And that's hugely positive. Always take your failures and see how you can use them against other people. You need to see where people have not resonated with your message and then announce that. Own your own failure, tell your user base, and they'll trust you more that you're going to use quality content, that you're going to not waste their time, and that you're going to have respect for their intelligence. Those are all the common blockers. If anyone's got any more, I'd love to see some in the Q&A down below. Other than that, in terms of resources, I think the best way to do that is probably for me to put together a list of resources of where you can find examples, recent news stories, relevant COVID examples of security awareness implementations. And also I'll be putting together a presentation. So if you do want that pack of resources, do email me or send me a LinkedIn message or get in touch and let me know that you'd be interested in receiving that package. Often, the best resources are internal because they relate directly to your industry and to your organization's experience, and they can often make you look good as you're responding to maybe a previous administration's mistakes, or you're building on the business's internal story. And that's all we've got time for today. I'm going to put up a poll now, and we can see what topic people would be interested in seeing next week. And I'd love to hear your feedback as well. If you enjoyed this, if you want any changes to the webinar format, I'd love to hear them. And I hope that everyone's having a lovely, lovely day. It's very nice weather here. So we've got So it's currently a 50-50 split between security awareness from home, what's changed, and creating an ambassador program for security awareness. So I might have to go internal for that discussion. But thank you very much for, I'll end the polling there. Thank you very much for tuning in. And if you would like to send me any feedback, I'd be very grateful for that. Very kind. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to end the session now.